Do we have too much government?
We need to put people ahead of corporate profits.
This system is so lopsided. This threat is a real threat to democracy.
And I think that's really important. That's something we haven't been doing in this country for a long time.
Where do you start? What do you do? How do you do it?
Access to Democracy and other Egan Community Television programming is supported by Thomson Reuters, makers of Westlaw Next and based in Egan. Through Westlaw Next and other innovative online services, Thomson Reuters is the world's leading source of intelligent information for businesses and professionals. Online at thomsonreuters.com. And by U.S. Federal Credit Union, the member-owned financial institution offering service, value, and experience you can trust to the greater Twin Cities community.
Welcome to Access to Democracy. We return, Alan Miller sitting in as usual, I guess sitting here as usual. One of the rules that we've had here is that we try not to have a guest on too often. But with respect to today's guest, Professor David Schultz of Hamline, who was here a few months ago, we only got halfway into a discussion, and he has become really one of our favorite gurus. So we have him back here today, and welcome back, David.
Thank you very much.
One of the things that we didn't get to discuss, your newest book, one of 30 that you have written.
Correct.
The 10 states that will control winning the presidency in 2016,
Yeah.
which is fascinating. And how did you arrive at 10 states, and what states are they? And let's take it from there.
Sure. Okay. The title of the book is Presidential Swing States, Why 10 Only Matter. And the premise starts with the fact that the 2016 presidential elections are over already in 40 states. And they're over because of a consequence of the Electoral College, which in 48 out of 50 states allocates electoral votes, winner take all, and because in many of those states the partisan support is so lopsided. For example, a state like New York, Republican presidential candidate has no chance of winning.
State like Iowa?
Iowa, that's going to be different in a second here. But a state like Texas, no Democrat can win Texas. And so we know that there are 40 states that effectively is over. And there's a small group of states, 10 states particular, in which really the entire battle for the presidency centers around. And we've seen that for the last 7 or 8 elections. And many people could probably already guess what they are. You know, we can look at states such as, and I may not get them all in my counting off today, we can look at states such as Colorado, we can look at Virginia, Florida, Ohio, Iowa, Wisconsin, North Carolina, Virginia, Nevada. It's a small clustering of states where we don't necessarily know what's going to happen. And the way I like to talk about my book is that the way to understand the American presidential election is with 3 sets of numbers, 10, 10, 270. Now, 270 refers to the fact that you need to win 270 electoral votes to win the presidency. Remember, it's not who gets the most popular vote. Al Gore.
I was going to say, Al Gore could tell us all about that.
Exactly. So it's the race to 270. So to get to those 270, again, the Democrats roughly have enough states in their pocket that are equivalent to about 190, 200 electoral votes. Republicans more or less have in their pocket about 180 states, 190 states. That leaves a balance of these 10 states. And again, the most famous, Ohio and Florida. Within those 10 states, partly why they're swing states is because neither the Republicans nor the Democrats have a majority, and the battleground is with the swing voters, about 10% of the population. So think about what our presidential election has turned into, and this is what our book is about. 10% of the voters in 10 states determine who gets 270 electoral votes, who wins the presidency. And so in some sense, we're looking at an election where only a very small number of voters on one level are decisive or matter for who gets elected president.
Which is probably why there are certain states that you'll find visited much more often by the candidates than others, simply because they know that they have to win those swing states.
Exactly. Use 2012 as an example. 2012, Romney versus Obama. After the convention, only 13 states in the United States received a visit from a presidential candidate or a surrogate. States like Ohio and Florida obviously got a ton of visits. Give you an example: New York, none; California, none; Texas, none; even Minnesota, because Minnesota is not a swing state yet. Minnesota got one visit, and it got a visit from Mitt Romney, and I call it the bathroom break, because Mitt Romney was campaigning in Wisconsin, a swing state, flies to the Twin Cities at the airport, does a quick fundraiser, probably goes to the bathroom, and then gets on an airplane and flies to Iowa, another swing state. Otherwise, the rest of these states, the other 40, will not see a visit whatsoever.
That's really fascinating. And the fact of the matter is that suddenly Minnesota seems to be more important this year than it has been in the past. And as a matter of fact, the Democratic, on February 12th, the Democratic dinner here is going to feature all 3 Democratic presidential candidates.
Correct. And there's a couple of reasons for this. One of them is that, again, historically, Minnesota, for both the Democrats and Republicans, is a very good place to fundraise. There's a lot of money here that people give to the candidates, and so the Democrats especially want to come here. Second is that if the early indications are correct, Bernie Sanders, for example, has brought in very large crowds, when his visits have come to the Twin Cities. And I think Clinton wants to make sure this time, unlike 8 years ago when she ran, she wants to make sure that she doesn't lose caucus states. Her weakness 8 years ago was she couldn't win caucus states, the Iowas, the Minnesotas, the Nevadas, and places like that. And so I think she's coming here partly because also, if the polls are also correct, she's ahead, but not by a lot in Iowa. She may lose New Hampshire. She may have a little bit of a difficult road, so she's going to come here just to make sure that she doesn't mess up in the way she did 8 years ago, at least from her strategy.
And but one of the things that really has annoyed me about the Democratic campaign, or I should say the Democratic non-campaign, is that Debbie Wasserman Schultz, who is the chairman of the Democratic Party this year, committed to Hillary very early on.
Yes.
And they have scheduled only 3 Democratic debates, which the other candidates have really, really bemoaned.
And 2 of them on Saturday nights.
And 2 of them on Saturday nights when nobody watches to begin with. And that's strictly to favor Hillary.
Right.
And that I find extremely inappropriate and annoying, and certainly something that is very unfair on top of everything else.
It is unfair, but this is the strategy that Clinton played 8 years ago. 8 years ago, she put all of her eggs in the basket of getting the support from the Democratic Party leadership and banked on the fact that those party leaders would support her. And they did. But nonetheless, what Barack Obama did was show how a grassroots effort, really organizing people from the bottom up, could transform things. And we're seeing the exact same thing happen this year with Clinton, too, that she pushed very hard, very early on. She's won over the support of the leadership. In the state of Minnesota, Ken Martin, who's the state party chair, is an enthusiastic Clinton supporter already.
Has been right from the get-go.
That's right. And so the idea of saying that the party hierarchy or the officers, let's say the party officers, are going to be neutral in terms of then letting the rank and file decide what's going to happen in terms of who's going to be picked. That's not occurring anymore. The deck is stacked right from the beginning against, in this case, against not just Bernie Sanders, but of course Martin O'Malley. That they're getting almost no exposure, and Clinton is benefiting from a set of rules helping her from the start.
And the same is true of media exposure for these candidates. It's all Clinton. All you hear from the Republicans is Clinton. The only one who seems to get any press is Clinton.
Right.
And Sanders, who has turned out, as you said, large crowds, of very enthusiastic supporters is not getting the press. And O'Malley is not even on the scoreboard virtually.
Exactly. And I want to set up a comparison here. It's not just Clinton versus Sanders, but throw in Trump also. And I'm going to make the statement and say that if Bernie Sanders got half of the media coverage that Donald Trump is receiving right now, he would be in first place for the Democrats. But why isn't he getting it? And there's sort of a couple of reasons here. One is that Trump is media savvy, for good or for bad. For 13 or 14 years doing The Apprentice, he's media savvy and he generates headlines. But the second thing is this gets to both his message and the corporate structure of the media in the United States is that this is a corporately owned, media. All the major networks are owned by larger for-profit conglomerates. And Donald Trump's message does not threaten corporate America. It does not challenge the power of corporate America. Whereas Bernie Sanders' message, a message about economic inequality, about corporate power in America, is a direct attack upon that very media structure. So do you think, honestly, they're going to give him any decent coverage whatsoever? Nah, they're not going to provide.
And they haven't been.
They haven't. So they're doing exactly what I would expect the corporate media to do, which is not give coverage to a candidate that's openly critical of the power that they exercise in our society.
And I guess they call that part of free expression,
Yes.
but it really is manifestly unfair.
Yeah.
And there was a time when there was a fairness doctrine.
Correct.
In terms of publicity, and where you had to share it among all the candidates. Well, that's not so anymore. That was done away with. And of course, Trump has eclipsed the whole rest of the party, which is now, I think, down to 14 candidates or 13 candidates. There are a few people who are starting to surface now, basically because some of what Trump has proposed is not only unconstitutional, not illegal, but is so prejudicial that some other people are starting to surface.
Yeah, we're starting to see a little bit of a cracks, but even with those little bit of cracks, the polls are still indicating among Republicans that he's got a pretty solid lead. And in fact, he's sort of solidifying his lead. But yes, nonetheless, we can sort of put Cruz and Rubio perhaps as sort of right behind him. Ben Carson, who was leading in Iowa up till a few weeks ago, has taken a huge tumble, partly because of his inexperience in foreign affairs, and also because, I have to say this, some incredibly stupid remarks that he's made.
Well, it shows how uninformed he is on some things.
Yeah, did you know that the pyramids in Egypt were built to store grain?
No, that was a first for me.
I had read history for years, and I had never seen that fact before.
I checked it out with the Egyptians, and they didn't know it either.
See, I guess we all learn something every day. But the fact is, he has started to fade at this point, and so we've got sort of this tier of Trump. We have Cruz, we have Rubio, and then it's a huge jump till you get down to the rest, including, I think, the biggest surprise, Jeb Bush.
Jeb Bush,
who's
amazing that he has 5%.
That's right.
And I also thought that the governor of Ohio would have, Kasich would have a lot more support.
Yes.
Because he's a very experienced politician, right across the board, statewide, federal-wide.
Right.
Been in Congress, and he doesn't seem to be able to get on track either.
Right. And I think partly what we're seeing now is that, for the last 30 years, maybe 40 years, the Republicans have run against government, have been the party against government. Well, it almost logically makes sense at this point that who's their number one choice? Donald Trump, who is outside of government, no experience whatsoever, and their other choices, Ted Cruz, who, while he's a U.S. Senator, former Attorney General, clearly in his message, it's against government, and the same with Rubio. And so the favoritism seems to be for those who really, really hate government, not just dislike it or running against it, but actually hate it, and in language that makes government sound like the enemy.
It's interesting also because the Republicans have been running against Obama. Well, they've been running against Obama for 7 years now, but whatever he does, automatically they will oppose. But they also have been running against Hillary as though it's a given that she will be the candidate. And it may be that she will be the candidate, But I do think that Sanders has yet to be completely heard from, notwithstanding the fact that the party hasn't given him a fair shake.
See, I agree, and I think one of the interesting things to look to see is on February 1st. That's the Iowa caucuses. That's the official start. And I say this for a couple of reasons. One is that going into Iowa, Bernie Sanders has as much cash on hand, or almost as much cash on hand, as Hillary Clinton does. She raised a lot of money, but she blows through that money like there's no tomorrow. Whereas Sanders has raised a ton of money, and it's not costing him much to raise it. And I was talking to a reporter down in Rochester, Minnesota, just to give you an idea, a couple of weeks ago. And Rochester, Minnesota television stations reach northern Iowa. So a lot of it's, so they'll do some ad buys there. And she was telling me that the Rochester stations have equal amounts of money being spent by Clinton and Sanders for television advertising. So he's going toe-to-toe with her at this point. If it's a caucus state, his supporters, polls are suggesting this, are more enthusiastic about him than her supporters are about her. I still don't rule out in a caucus that he wins an upset, and he's still favored in New Hampshire. And if that happens, that could, if he could win those first two, that changes the dynamic of the campaign.
Yeah, it certainly does. And people all across the country then have to reappraise their thinking.
Exactly.
Which they will do.
Right.
In that circumstance. And I have been so impressed with Sanders from the get-go.
Yes.
As a matter of fact, there was a Barbara Walters special about the 10 leading people of 2015,
Okay.
and he was one of the 10. Trump, of course, was one
Sure,
of the 10
sure.
also. But she wanted to know if it was his good looks that got him in the top 10,
or his fine accent, perhaps.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
right.
And a Brooklyn boy.
That's
I
right.
mean, it's just incredible. His ride has been incredible up to this point, no matter what happens.
Right. And I think partly what we have to ascribe it to is the message that in different ways Trump and Sanders are appealing to the something similar. There is this sense, which is real, that things are worse for middle class and poor America than they were 20 years ago.
The disenfranchised majority.
Exactly.
And we just saw from statistics that the middle class is not even the majority anymore.
It isn't. In fact, we don't even have the largest middle class as a proportion of the population of the world anymore. Canada surpasses us. And so we have statistics. The average family in America makes less now than they made back in 1989. Working more hours. Most people who own a house still see their house worth less now than it was, 7 or 8 years ago. There is this sense in which things are not good. The government bailed out the banks. It let the little people go. And Trump talks about saying, well, the reason why all this is so bad, it's the immigrants, it's the Muslims, it's the Hispanics. Sanders is saying, no, the inequality is about the inequality. It's about the power of the rich versus poor in our society. He's actually using the language
And
of
he
class.
uses the statistics also
Exactly.
to indicate it.
Yeah, he's actually talking about facts. And as we know, facts may not be important for some people, but for a lot of us who believe that facts are important, he actually could back up what he says with facts. And so Sanders is talking all about, I think, the real source of that anxiety. And what's so disappointing right now, of course it was a tragedy what happened in Paris. Of course it was a tragedy what happened in San Bernardino. But it's a classic pattern that war and fear dissuade or distract people.
Franklin Roosevelt, we have nothing to fear but fear itself.
Right.
And, that still holds true.
Exactly.
We overreact
Yeah.
terribly when something like either of those two.
Right. There's an ugly side of American history. I said this once, that fear and prejudice make us do stupid things. In 1689, we burned a bunch of women at the stake claiming they were witches. We've persecuted gays at Stonewall. We hounded people because of their political beliefs in the McCarthy era.
How about slavery?
Slavery. We have always found a way of blaming somebody else because of fear and prejudice. And now, our new fear and prejudice that the Republicans are hammering really hard, Muslims and immigrants. And if you listen to the debate this past week, every Republican, just about to a T, wants to just go to war.
Every one of them mentioned, they said, we are at war.
Yeah.
We are at war. And yet, yesterday in Congress, the leaders of both houses,
Yes.
which are Republicans, said that they're not going to introduce a war resolution.
Exactly.
So how hypocritical is that?
Of course it is. I mean, Obama has asked them a couple of times, give me a resolution, give me support for taking action against ISIS, and they won't, and then he gets criticized for not acting. Now, we can have a great debate regarding the fact that probably almost any strategy being thought of right now for addressing ISIS is not going to work. You know, that the idea of saying we're going to bomb them into oblivion, what Ted Cruz is, what we're going to carpet bomb or something
until the sand blows, whatever
like that.
Yeah.
These are strategies that are not going to work. But the other thing that I'm worried about here is, I'll use a phrase, war is a way for the Republicans and for many people to distract basic Americans from the real agenda of corporate America and of the rich, which is really about what? It's about making money. It's about perpetuating that rich versus poor. And if you keep people scared, they won't pay attention as much to the fact that the problems
and
they
the
have.
problem, of course, of education.
Yeah.
The problem of health care. And health care has gotten so much better
Right.
because of the Affordable Care Act.
Yes, yes.
But you would never know it by listening to any of those candidates or the
Right.
Republican Congress, which voted 58 times now
That's right.
to do away with it. Talk about repeating the same thing as a sign of idiocy.
That's right.
It's incredible. But education and health care, the environment.
That's right.
They deny that there is global warming or climate change. But every statistic and every responsible expert talks about it.
Yeah.
Because it is a fact.
It is.
When you talk about facts, that's certainly a fact that is most detrimental to the generations behind us.
Right.
If we don't do something now.
Right. And I think one of the great things that we did in the last couple of weeks was the talks in Paris for addressing, climate change and global warming. And we may not see the results of that in our generation, but this is all about intergenerational justice. This is about what we owe to our children, our grandchildren, and to people years down the line who we won't even know. That there's a sense in which part of what the denying of global warming is about is not just about denying facts. It's about, let's just call it what it is. It's about being greedy and self-interested. It's about saying, I don't care about my children, about my grandchildren. Same thing about people who fight expenditures for helping education. It's so short-sighted in terms of saying that I don't want to spend money on education. I don't want to spend money on people who are the poor. I don't care.
Germany, and I heard this last night for the first time, not only gives free college to all its students who want to go to college, they will make college free for students from other countries who want to go there. We can't even do it for our own.
Yes.
We have college debt. We have incredible amounts. Football coaches,
they make
certainly.
They make a ton of money, but you're right. We have over $1 trillion in student loan debt in the United States. That's larger than the debt that people owe on credit cards in the United States. I'm going to tell a quick story here, is that when I was an undergraduate applying to graduate schools, I'm from New York, and I applied around, and Rutgers University in New Jersey offered me a scholarship, and I went there. And it used to be the policy at Rutgers to say that we're going to offer a lot of money to attract students, not just to stay in our state, that is our domestic students, but to attract them from other states. Why? Bringing students in our state, bright people, and having them stay here is good for the economy. And why we haven't figured that out in the United States, I don't know, because there's strong correlations between the level of education that people have, how much money they make, how productive they are, how successful states are, all positive indices. It's the single best investment we can make in our society.
You're talking facts.
Yes.
And people forget about facts when they're dealing in fear.
Exactly.
When emotions carry them away.
Yes.
And how sad and how unfortunate that is, on top of the fact that there is such a wide degree of uninformed people, uninformed voters, people who don't read newspapers anymore, people who get sound bites and listen and treat them as though they're facts, people who think that the internet is a place where you can get wisdom. But the fact of the matter is, half of the material on the internet is absolutely fallacious.
Yeah, yeah. It's, I mean, partly it is a problem about average people not having information. Partly it's because of a failed, in some situations, a failed educational system for some people. But on a different level, I want to hold a responsibility to the leaders, because I can understand why somebody who is working at a minimum wage job with a family 60 hours, 70 hours a week may not have a lot of time to stay well informed. I can understand. Many of us, our biggest priority is what? Putting food on the table, figuring out the health care, figuring out a safe, decent school to send our kids to. But I really especially blame elected leaders, the people who know better, who have the time, who have the access to information. And what bothers me, watching the debates, the presidential debates, especially for the Republicans, is listening to the comments made by various individuals, which are just false. Let's just call them what they are. They're lies. They're outright lies. And they're lying to the American public, and it gets hard for the American public then to sort out fact from fiction.
Politico has done a wonderful job for people who follow Politico and who read
Right.
About what the facts are, what the truth is, whose pants are on fire.
Right, exactly.
And unfortunately, the people who are reading that are few and far between.
That's right. The people who are reading it are the people who are probably already reasonably well informed about the political system. The people who you want to reach are those young people. You want to reach, I'd say, people of color. These are people who generally don't have as much access to the news or are busy. And then there's poor people who also just don't have access. And so there's a variety of people who we really would want to reach better than we are, but they don't have the resources or the ability to sort this information out.
And if nothing else, this program, I hope, goes out to people who will pay attention, because no election, in my mind, is more important than the election that we're holding this year.
Yes.
And it really, really can determine the path that this country is going to take for the next decade at least.
Yeah.
And don't vote against your self-interest.
Yeah.
Vote, register, become informed, be a participant, and fight for what will be the legacy that we're leaving for our families and our children.
I couldn't have said it any better.
And Professor David Schultz, we've shot a half hour again. To be continued.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.